there's so many different touch points about Hamilton that you can marvel at. They spent probably the least amount of advertising money of any Broadway show in the last 30 years because the people drove it through social media, through word of mouth, through coming back, because they saw themselves somewhere inside that story. It appealed to them, and that's such a powerful thing.
This is a nerd moment for me, just like it is for y'all. I saw Hamilton in 2015 with this cast, so this is just unbelievable to be here. And this film festival is filled with magical moments. Last night, at an undisclosed location in Gettysburg, about 24 of us, including the people we're about to introduce, were treated to an impromptu concert last night. And it was about 8 songs or so, and here was the Hamilton cast, right up front, absolutely wowed and jamming along with it. This is so authentic. Music and art obviously mean a whole lot to them, which is not surprising at all. It's a pleasure to be in here in the room where it's about to happen again. Okieriete Onaodowan, man, is a Grammy Award-winning stage, film, and television actor. You may know him from his films American Fiction, A Quiet Place 2, and shows Jack Ryan, Girls, Law & Order SVU, Ballers, and many others. He's worked with a bunch of personalities that you know. He's known for numerous acclaimed performances, including, I was deciding how to do this, including Taylor's Apprentice, Hercules, Mulligan, and James Madison in Hamilton. It's been a pleasure to get to know him. Phillipa Soo is a Tony and Emmy Award nominated and Grammy Award winning performer, actress, and writer, best known for originating the role of Eliza Schuyler Hamilton in Hamilton, of course. Other stage credits include High Spirits, Camelot, Into the Woods, many others. Parisian Woman. You may know her from the shows Dr. Odyssey, Dope Stick, Shining Girls, and voice acting in Over the Moon and The One and Only Ivan. She has starred in the film One True Loves and does voice acting as well. In her copious free time, she just released a New York Times best-selling children's book, Piper Chen Sings. Christopher Jackson, who I've gotten to know a little bit, is a Tony Award-nominated actor and Grammy and Emmy Award-winning songwriter and composer. You have seen him in Sex and the City, The Reboot, Bull, The Good Wife, Nurse Jackie, Person of Interest, and others as well. Best known for portraying the very model of a modern Major General in Hamilton, and too many additional Broadway credits to list here. He is now known for performing in this very room last night. Somebody who smiles more than I do, the always smiling Catherine Malone France will moderate this discussion. She is president and CEO of the Better Angel Society, spending decades with public engagement in cultural heritage through historic places, education, and the arts. At the Better Angel Society, she has developed new models to support American history documentaries, engage young filmmakers to tell their stories, and build community around the films that tell our shared stories. She served as Chief Preservation Officer at the National Trust for Historic Preservation and has my personal gratitude for that preservation work. Now, through my work at the American Battlefield Trust, I remember it was only about 4 months ago where I approached our friends at the Ray and Vera Kana Foundation and asked whether they would support helping to bring some Hamilton cast here for the Gettysburg Film Festival. They immediately jumped on it. They supported this event, and they have my heartiest thanks to the foundation for helping to make this happen. Let's bring as the warmest possible Hamiltonian welcome for Onaodowan and Christopher Jackson, Phillipa Soo, and Catherine Malone France.
All right, good morning, everybody. I have to say, it is a tremendous privilege to get to have that conversation, but with great privilege comes great responsibility. And I want this audience to know that I feel responsible to them. I have given them a lot of thought and what they might want to know about this. And so I want to make sure you all feel seen in this. So I want to check one more time. Do we have some Hamilton super fans? So I think we do. So, let's talk first about the cultural phenomenon of this. And that's, if you were here last night, you heard Ken say that, right? That it is the biggest cultural phenomenon of the 21st century. But I also think back to, I had a friend who saw it at the Public Theater very early, and I got a text from him from the theater, and it just said, "I have just seen a musical that changes everything." And so I wonder, not just what it's like to be part of a cultural phenomenon, but was there a moment when you realized that you were part of a cultural phenomenon?
I think there were 1,000 moments.
Right?
It was never just one.
Yes.
How things change, they don't change collectively until they're affected individually.
Yes.
So there were, 1,000, 10,000 points of light and of something just giving you goosebumps and changing the way you think about something, or seeing us up on stage and watching us watch each other. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The show's very distinct in that regard, but it happened because people were affected by it for whatever reason, and they couldn't not talk about it. They couldn't not send that text or make that phone call and say, "Hey,
That's right.
I just had an experience, and I need to share it with you, and I need you to go have the experience, so then we can talk about it more."
Yes.
And that's, I think, what was so unique about how this show started to be absorbed by the public.
Yes.
Yeah.
That sharing.
Yeah.
I love that.
I feel like, it was my first show on Broadway, Hamilton, and one of my first jobs, ever. I was very young, and I knew in that moment when we were building it, and the world hadn't seen it yet, that it was very special. As an artist, I just was like, this is a dream, to be in this room with these wonderful people telling this very important story, getting to play a historical figure, getting to play this wonderful woman, Eliza Hamilton. And I had a sense of how big it would be, but like Chris was saying, little things would happen, like, Michelle Obama came to our show downtown. And, I was just like trying to figure out how to just pace myself and be a part of the experience, just by being like nervous backstage generally.
Right.
And then I just looked to my right and I'm like, is that a Secret Service person? Okay, great. Dun, 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 dun. I like go out to start. And like those little moments like that, just getting to speak with some of my favorite leaders and artists and family members, loved ones. There was this like deep connection that they all had to this piece, and I felt so honored that I got to be a part of that. But I think like the two biggest moments for me was once the album came out and people had access to the show in a way that was so expansive, and going out and doing the show every night, now I could start to see people's mouths moving, doing the words along with us. And that was kind of a moment where I was like, whoa. And then another moment, I had a friend who, at the time, her son was 4 years old. He's now a grown person now. But he came to the stage door, and he was dressed as George Washington.
Amazing.
And I brought them backstage, and his whole face just like lit up. But he was like in full. He had the hat.
Amazing.
He had watched the whole entire show.
Amazing.
And to see how people that young had access to this story and felt seen by this story really moved me very much so.
I love that moment of seeing from the stage when they start to sing.
Oh yeah, I was like, I better not mess up these lyrics because they'll know.
Right. Like I cannot, it's a whole new level of, it's accountability, right? It's a whole new level of that.
For me, it actually happened downtown, to piggyback on seeing Michelle Obama. Broadway can be a very fickle business. You think something is great, and then it closes in 2 weeks, and you're like, how did that happen? So you never really know how remarkable something will be received. But downtown, Michelle Obama came, the Clintons came, Dick Cheney came, Q-Tip came, Busta Rhymes came, Paul McCartney came. And when that started happening, like what could possibly bring those people
Amazing.
together. Like, I want to be in the room where the Cheneys, the Clintons, and Busta Rhymes and Q-Tip, like, what are you guys? And then Weird Al came. I'm like, okay, let's do this. So that was kind of the moment when I was like, this is something special to bring so many iconoclastic people from so many different facets.
Yes.
Who was the
of
first? Was
zeitgeist.
Tom Hanks the first like guy, person, so Uber that came? Because that was like the first week, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was
And
either,
then
it was either
he
him or
hung with us for
Michelle.
like an hour. I missed my bus
Yeah.
going home because Tom Hanks and his wife Rita were there, and they just kept wanting to keep talking.
Busta
And we wanted
Rhymes
to
talked to
talk
us
him.
for hours.
Yeah.
Busta Rhymes
Busta
couldn't
was
get
hanging
enough.
out.
He was just sitting there just giving. I was like, yeah, okay, Bus, let's go. What's up? Like it was crazy the people who came down. But that
Amazing.
assembling, that Avengers
That-
assembling was the thing
Yes.
where I was like, yo,
That
what is
an Avengers
this?
assembling. Well, yes, Busta Rhymes and Dick Cheney, right? Like that's a cultural phenomenon. That's what you've got. So let's talk a little bit about these characters and your process. You said at lunch a little bit about finding the texture in characters. And so I'd love to hear about how you sort of stepped into these characters, and were there particular things that you learned about them? Were there documents you read or paintings you saw or places you went to or anything? What was your process like of stepping into these? And Oak, I kind of want to start with you because you stepped into two,
And
two,
brilliantly so.
well, I was thinking earlier that you did. You did as much or more for the charisma of James Madison than Dolly Madison, right? Like she was the other sort of hype man for Madison. So what was it? How did you step into those characters? How did you build them?
It was really cool and fascinating. It was a fusion of who they were and then who they were in the show. Madison was easier. Hercules Mulligan, there isn't really much on him. I was trying to do as much research as I can, and there's not really too much research on him, about him. After the war, he just kind of like disappears and goes back to his wife and kids. So it was really, with him, it was finding the energy of someone who's just ready to go. And that's what I gathered from him. And at any point, a hype man is, I'm ready to support and do whatever I can. And there's a level of confidence you need to be to straight up be a spy and just lie wholesale to people's faces. Like there's a certain level of confidence you need just to flat out lie, knowing if you get caught, they fit to kill me. Like you still have to say it with your whole chest. So that was, and the dope thing about Madison though, there was a lovely couple who would come and see the show and they're big historians and they would just give me these like just old books. They're like, here's like the second edition of like the autobiography of James Madison. And I'm like, you should keep this and maybe sell it on eBay. And they're like, no, we want you to have it. And I said, sure. And I took the book. But Madison was fascinating that he didn't love campaigning. He was just kind of a straight shooter. And that really allowed me to anchor the Madison that you see, where there's not too much flourish. There's not that much there for him. Like he is supporting, but he's just gonna do what he needs to do. And he was very sickly, so there's only so much he can literally do physically. And then the joy is I wanted to juxtapose the two of them as much as I possibly can. I really wanted to create some theater magic to have you do a double take or not even realize that it's the same person because they were so wildly different in how they operated and how they contributed to the story. So that was a lot of fun, but both of them was kind of based on whatever the energy I got from the research I found and how can I infuse that into who they are in the show. And I think it worked.
It worked. Philippa, Eliza is the beating, breaking part of Hamilton. But there's so many primary sources that come into this portrayal. How did you step into her?
My journey was interesting because I had a very informative discussion with Ron Chernow.
Right.
And I was basically like, can I pick your brain? Like, tell me everything about Eliza. And he was basically like, well, I could tell you everything about Eliza, but there's so much that we don't know, hence the letters being burned. They took some artistic liberties there, but like we assume that something happened because there's just like a hole missing there. And I sort of picked through trying to find as many things, accounts from other people about her and what she was like, and I gathered quite a bit, and honestly, a lot of what Lynn had gathered is in the show, brilliantly so, just in terms of, who she was as a person, who she was to Hamilton, the love that was there, the love for her sisters as well that was there. And I sort of like hit a roadblock at one point because I was like, I'm not sure how all of this information is helping me. I'm sort of like at a loss here. And it was the last reading that we did before the workshops. It was the first time that the whole show was being performed out loud, but behind music stands. So we were just standing. And the last song hadn't been written yet. And, I'm like, I'm very green. I'm so grateful to be in this room. I'm watching Lynn work and like watching him and seeing him as Hamilton and the process of writing the musical and also playing Hamilton in the process of being prolific and doing all the things that he did in his life. So it was like this wonderful parallel that it really fed me in my performance. And then it is the morning of the reading of this full reading that I'm talking about, and I walk in and Lynn's like, okay, you have the last song of the show. And I was like, what? Why? Why? Why me? Why? And basically I was like, well, sure, like show me the music. And I'm reading through it and I'm learning the lyrics and I'm learning the notes. And I was in awe of all of the things that she had done in her lifetime. Yes. So really that moment where, Phillipa Soo, who is just really trying to find her place in the world and is being a good student and a good listener and just being grateful to be in the room, is now being given this great responsibility and wonderful blessing of an opportunity. And the sort of domino effect of what we are feeling at the end of the show when we learn all of these things about her is actually very similar to what I felt in that room that day. And so much of my performance as Eliza was informed by my experience in the show and being in the room, because I think a lot of her journey was stepping into her own, and I think like a lot of us feeling like, I'm just here to be a listener, I'm here to be a supporter, I'm not really sure what my purpose is yet. And then to be requested by the universe to step into her own really felt like her journey. So, the research, at a certain point I was like, I think I need to let go of the homework a little bit, because I think who she is transcends any little tidbit that you could find, in a letter or in a book. And really so much of it is about embodying her spirit in that room and honoring all of the things that she did with her life.
And that's what it is to be a great actress, right? Chris, the president, how do you step into this?
I try to, like, as you guys are answering your questions, I'm like going through the Filodex of all of the different things. But the one thing that struck me, and I say this in total deference to the fact that I sat between Ken Burns last night and Rick Atkinson, and I had no business whatsoever.
You held your own.
That's very, very kind of you.
You held your own.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Totally.
Washington is the only grown-up in the entire show.
Yes.
Not an original, observation from me. Thank you, Tommy Kail. No, Washington's the only grown-up. He's the only guy really worried about things all the time. And in the construct of how he relates, Chris the actor, love all of the texture and the detail, and I had the benefit of being able to inhabit a character who was so well documented,
Right.
by the world, obviously, But you only meet Washington when he's having a moment of inflection for Hamilton, right? Every time you see Washington, he's coming from somewhere, he bumps into Hamilton, he yells at him, and then goes away. Right?
Yes.
To the extent that, like, you know, and hopefully in that collision, Hamilton can learn how not to mess something up.
Yes.
And again, not an original observation, but Hamilton stays sort of inside the bounds until Washington leaves, and then there's no ballast for him.
Right.
Right? There's no standard for Hamilton to either aspire to his office or to his character or to his judgment or any of those things. And that's when we see the affairs and the spinning out and all the things like in the
Right.
construct of the show.
Right.
And so for me, the thing that was the most interesting oftentimes was how those moments so closely sort of mirrored my own personal journey in my life and the things that I was actively, I have kids, y'all. And I was, besides Renee, I was the only one in the company with kids, y'all. And like, you know, when you're in the theater, you make orphans of your children, especially in any show, but especially a show like Hamilton. And so the pull and the conflict inward was so real every day.
Yes.
It kind of fueled a lot of the reason, like, Mimi inside was me yelling at my child.
Right.
Or at myself, or a version of
Or
me.
both.
It's meta, it's so many levels. But, you know, like, there were so many things happening at that time. And the other thing that I found really interesting about Washington that connected him to everybody else, every other character on stage, is that we were all reaching for something. As actors and
Yes.
business people and human beings, we were all looking for, every day, a more completed version of ourselves than the day before.
Yes.
So art meaning life and imitating life and vice versa, you know what I mean? And so that was, and just holding on to all of the work that we had done and were continued to build on with all of the noise that was happening.
Yes.
Because I'm sorry, but like Dick Cheney and Busta Rhymes, you know, like
That happened.
it was heady, and the beautiful part was that people after the show, when they came to meet with us, it wasn't as if they were meeting us because we were now the newest, most best thing that ever existed. There was something about the experience that turned everybody back into their purest form, which is most of them were artists.
Right.
And so if Meryl Streep wants to have a conversation with Chris Jackson, one of these is not like the other. in terms of journey and body of work and the breadth and wealth of knowledge, and yet we just stood and talked as artists.
Right.
You know, we met each other at that level and stayed at that level, and
Right.
it's really hard to be in that space
Right.
without the world pulling you out of it.
Yes.
It's really, 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 really hard, and so those moments become treasured and as much a part of the experience as any of the character work we were doing on stage.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to stay with that idea of moments, but you all started to do this a little bit in the green room, which was talk about your favorite moments in other people's performances, right? And that was so magical to even hear you start to talk about that. I'd love for this audience to get to hear that too. Can you name one or two, a favorite moment in someone
easier when the
else's?
thing is playing,
I
but,
know. I saw you, react.
For me, Wait For It has always been
Yeah.
when I clap for
Yeah.
the homie,
Wait for it.
Leslie Odom Jr. returning to the show in London. But for real, when you initially start doing a project or you're thinking about it, they may send you demo tracks of it to listen to and get a feel for it. And Wait For It and Satisfied, I did not listen to the rest of the album. Those were the only two songs I knew because Wait For It is just unbelievable. And I was fortunate to be on stage during it. Was everybody on stage for Wait For It? Yeah.
Yeah, we were all there.
It's just in listening to him every night, something about that song, how he does it, his level of restraint he has with it, that's when the show it wasn't work, it was a gift.
Yeah.
Just to be able I get to sit down and just watch and listen to this man every night. Every night.
Yes.
and I'm getting paid to do it. I have to jump around and do all sorts of mess. Totally fine. Don't replace Leslie while I'm there, though. That's why I got in the game. But really, like that moment for me, just listening to him and watching him embody that every night, that was, there are many other moments too.
Yeah.
Burn also with Pips is like bananas.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
I feel like there are so many to name, but for me personally, you know, getting to be with my sisters. Now, the connection that you see on screen is only like the tiniest sliver of what actually exists in our actual relationship, Renee, Jasmine, and myself. I have a very, very specific moment backstage before Schuyler Sisters when we'd all be holding hands backstage, like getting ready for our entrance, like doing a little bop together, you know, trying to connect. And we would just like, we'd all put our heads together and we would just sort of like take a breath. And that level of connection and sisterhood, God, I will always be so grateful to Lynn for writing this like very complicated, you know, it's not your traditional like, and then Eliza, his wife, you know, the love story. Like, no, this is actually a story about a woman and her love for her husband, and her love for her sisters, and her love for her country. And getting to share the stage with those two, it was like heaven. It was just a little slice of heaven every day.
I'm just smiling thinking about it because you never saw one of them. You only ever saw three of them.
I love that.
Literally, they walk out on stage and you're holding hands, but it feels like that's how y'all were all the time.
Well, in fact, the Schuyler Sisters downtown was very different than Schuyler Sisters when we did uptown. So the arrangement was a little bit different. And so we shared a dressing room at the Public Theater. There was very small space back there. So the three of us shared a dressing room. And thank God we got along because there was no space. And we would just be jamming, like, you know, intermission, pre-show, post-show. We'd be like, okay, so like, what are we singing now? Okay, ready? Reunited and it feels so good. Or you do the top, you do the bottom. Okay, ready? 5, 6, 7, let's go. And you know, we would just jam. And so Lack caught on to this. And so the sort of 3-part riff that you hear at the end, like that was added in for the Broadway version, specifically because he was like, I see you guys doing your little harmonies backstage. Yeah, and it sort of like was a very beautiful, fulfilled moment because we were like, this is how we connect as sisters in our lives, and here is how we get to connect as sisters on stage, so yeah.
And I remember the day in the rehearsal studio when he gave y'all that.
Oh, yeah.
And then how y'all went to this corner and worked it out, and then over there and worked it out. Chris, come here. How you? Okay. And then they went and worked it out. And then you talked. I think Renee asked Leslie too, and then it was like, okay, y'all were putting it together. It was the best thing in the world. It's so good.
It's so fun.
I love that.
I remember coming off stage every single show after One Last Time, and that thing broke me every single show. And the person that put me back together was Renee, because she just like, because I didn't need to talk. I just needed to like. It was a very isolating moment to stand there and sing that song, and it was fraught and it hurt, and it took everything that I could really muster. So feeling like I was right on the edge of existence, and then walking around and standing right by the staircase, the rollout staircase, and she would always be there, and she would just like grab my hand, and she'd like breathe with me. You're like, you good? You good? Okay, and then it would be, and then as I was able to kind of like quickly get back into reality, she would tell me something about her kids, I would tell her something about my kids. She would complain about her husband, I would complain about my wife. Because married life, and we aren't there. But all of these things happen 20-second bits.
Yes.
You know, and it always ended in gratitude. That was the thing. We had our little thing, and then by the time we got to the very end of it, before we go into the next section, how great is this right now? Yeah. And I would say I wouldn't want to be any other place in the world, and I wouldn't want to be with anybody else. Right? And then we would go on and do the second act.
Right. Well, and it
The rest
seems
of the
like
second act,
you
yeah.
brought that gratitude every single night
Yeah,
to every
yeah.
single performance.
Yeah.
I mean, that speaks to you as humans, too. I love that. I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific songs. Again, I'm trying to keep the theater geeks in the audience in mind, make sure that we cover that. I'm going to start with you. Can we talk about the cabinet battles? I mean, how did you put that together? What was it like to rehearse
Well, when I was
that?
conceiving of the show,
Yeah. No, but as an actor, right? I mean, that's no small feat. What you do in the cabinet battle.
but the cabinet battles, like, okay, so for any of you guys that don't know, there was a movie called 8 Mile, right? A particular MC named Slim Shady was in it. But there's inherent and in homage to like the bedrock practices of hip hop.
Right.
Is the battle.
Right.
It's both to like test yourself as an MC and to establish yourself with other MCs.
Yeah.
And the idea of putting a cabinet debate in the form of a rap battle, I'm sorry, is genius. It's blowing up conventions while adding it out, right?
Exactly. It's the most, I think it's the most amazing structure, right?
Right,
In
right.
the musical, that you're like, this is an MC battle, and it's the cabinet.
Also,
That-
one of the few times the microphones came in.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
that's
because
so true.
Because that's hip hop.
That's it,
you know?
right?
I would also like to just shout out the drop and the catch.
Yeah.
Performed flawlessly, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of
And
times.
true.
shout out to David for going along with anything I came up with. I'm like, David, let's do this. And he was so chill. He was like, okay. So most of the times I just think of the dumbest thing. And shout out for Tommy for letting it go.
That's
I do it, and
amazing.
we'd look at Tommy, and he'd be like, man, okay.
Because it's low-key one of the coldest moments in the show. It's like one of those things that you see, like, oh, those cats know each other so well, better than anybody else, you know?
Yes.
Those are those little things that you can't,
Yep.
you know, manufacture.
Yeah.
But the cabinet battle is such that because that made it to the zeitgeist and was such a well-known thing,
Right.
people were able to absorb it, these incredibly important ideas.
Yes.
And these arguably, foundational concerns
Yes.
baked into the arguments of the time.
Yes.
When you put it like, and there was no shortage of personal effrontery that was happening on a daily basis in
Right.
those arguments.
Right.
And still does, right?
Right.
So to have all of those different elements, a rap battle is the only thing
Yes.
that could encompass all of the messiness of the time and still
Yes.
progress the story
Yes.
on.
Yes.
It's pretty dope.
It is dope. Oak, let's talk about My Shot, right?
Yeah.
It is, you're part of that, you just performed part of it. It is, you gave the world one of the great hype songs, right? I mean, like, somebody, that's playing in a weight room right now, right? And somebody's listening to it on the way, before a job interview, right? Or a first date, or somebody's gonna go on a date tonight, and before they go, they're gonna,
I'm so scared.
I
of that.
want to see what that date is. I was like, shouldn't you put on, like, I don't know, Barry Manilow? Or,
no, not,
Luther Vandross?
not during the
You
date.
coming in like, Hercules, Mulligan! I'll have the steak and eggs, please. Oh, so it's a brunch?
I saw on your profile, you liked Hamilton, right? We're good. We're good.
Well, no, I mean, what is it? I'm thinking about that date still. I was thinking before the date.
It went so well.
No, but that's an awesome responsibility, right? To create a hype song. How did you do that? And you did it as an ensemble, right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the ensemble of the hype song.
It was just a lot of fun. I mean,
Yeah.
it's when you're doing stuff with the homies, it's not very hard. And at that point, like right before I bust out, like everyone, we all get in a huddle, and there's just
One
something.
of the best entrances of all time. Hands down.
It's really important.
Yes.
It's like, I would check in with everyone and like slap and punch everybody, and everyone's like, okay, we're in this together, but really, it's really how it was written. Some things are, if someone writes a high C and you hit it, it's like, how do you get that? It's like, it's just written so well that you just have to kind of match it and meet it.
Yes.
And I remember in the demo before, after the rap, everyone just goes, "Oh!" and starts screaming and whatnot, because it's just such a hype moment. So every night, we were so connected. There's so many moments that you don't see in the film, backstage, where there's so much choreography and life that people are like, do you get bored? I was never just waiting to go on. It was like, go on, how you doing? Check it with this person, joke. It really was familial, which is why we're so close. So when it came to that moment, we've had a whole first act leading to that. And it's like, oh yeah, this is the part where we bug out. All right, let's go. And it was just like a bug out moment. And then feeding off of, I'd say with every performance and every show, the audience, y'all the last members of the cast. So if I came out and every night it was just quiet and nobody really cared, it just kind of changed how hype you are. But like a hype man feeds off the energy he's getting back. So even today, y'all reaction back, it's just kind of like, great, this is my job and it's doing the job. So that allowed you to come out and be like, yes, it is gonna hype people up, great, let me go do that. And in the context of that number, it's just a moment where they needed something to turn. They needed the tide to turn. They needed to see Gandalf riding in, for Lord of the Rings fans. You know, they needed to see him on, like, I'm here, I got you. So all of that kind of fed into just do it. I don't have to worry about everything else. Just do the thing, say the thing, feel the thing, and it'll land. So. Yeah, it was joy, it was fun, and it was only possible because of literally the energy of everyone, audience, cast members, everything leading to that moment in the song before that allowed it to be like, now just do it.
Right. Amazing. Wow. So, and I mean, Philippa, there's so many moments to ask you about. Well, let's talk about the end of the show. You talked about it a little bit. And you know, I was rewatching it and I was thinking, first I started to say, it's one of the great endings in American theater, right? And then I stopped and I thought about things like Medea, like the end of Medea, or, you know, a classical. And I thought, no, that end of Hamilton, when you sing Who Lives, Who Dies, it's one of the great endings in theater. It's not American theater. It's one of the great endings in drama, right? Beautifully done. Can you just, but you have a lot to do in that song too, right?
Yeah.
You're busy, you know?
Yes.
You have a lot to communicate.
Yeah, I think Eliza's journey is very much, you know, Hamilton's like a firework. And Eliza is like the candle that is slowly tapering down, and you know, it's such a long trajectory. My show, like literally until the very end, it's just like a level of focus that I had to be locked into. I love that everyone is fascinated by the end of the show, because it means that I did my job. I also. I think that my journey in theater and why I do this, I came a long way from being a very like perfectionism, very like I needed to have the result mindset. You know, I always wanted to be a good student and get the results that I wanted. And in my journey in being an artist, I really had to learn how to live in the unknown and learn how to live in the question. That the goal of making art isn't to answer a question, it's to ask another question, lead you down a path. So that when you leave the theater, when you leave the movies, when you leave the museum, you're asking yourself questions as opposed to feeling like you have all the answers. And the fact that Lynn literally ends the show with a question,
right? Who
lives, who dies, who tells your story, was such a gift. And for me personally in that moment, it changed every day. It was one of the few moments that I actually got to look out into the audience and see faces, and a little bit break the fourth wall in terms of the meta of it all, that like, here we are telling you this story, and now we are in this theater, and there's something beyond as well. And I get asked a lot, like, what does the gasp mean? And I really feel like it's so disappointing, but I'm like, it's whatever you want it to mean. No, I mean, I had, you know, things that I was seeing every night. Sometimes it was just looking out into the house and seeing all the beautiful faces that were there with us. Sometimes it was Eliza's, her heaven, her God. Sometimes it was seeing Hamilton. Sometimes it was seeing the orphanage. Sometimes it was seeing her children. Sometimes it was seeing myself. Like it took on a lot of different flavors. Also because when you're in a show and you're doing that every single night, it's not going to be the same every day. It's depending on who's in the audience. Sometimes like if my mother was in the audience, I'd be thinking about Eliza's mother and her lineage and her ancestry. So it really took on whatever was happening in my life, in Eliza's life in that time, and it was very specific to the day and to the moment in time. But when we were building it, I remember very specifically Tommy Kail came backstage and he was like, I have one note about the end. So the gasp, make sure that it ends on an inhale, not on an exhale. Because this idea of giving the audience an opportunity to take the breath out, that I take the breath in and then the lights go out and then we can all, because there were a couple nights where it would be like, lights out, which is does a very different thing. Yeah, I don't know, but I just think it just speaks to like the minutia of building a show and the truly like group effort, best idea wins with this kind of thing, and also how precious bodies and breath and voices in space is. To be in a room and have a collective experience together is really powerful. So I'm just personally like very, very grateful that something that for me like selfishly was just like a fun moment of storytelling actually has become so impactful and so meaningful to so many people, and I'm very honored and proud of that. You didn't know that? Oh,
That
yeah.
was beautiful, really. Thank you. So I wonder if, you've done this a little bit, but I wonder if you all could talk a little bit about, we talked about Backstage, but just about the camaraderie of it, and maybe even like, not everything goes perfectly every night in the theater, right? When maybe something, right? When something went wrong, when something in the ensemble had to cover for each other, or just like something went wrong. I feel like there are stories here. I sense it.
Well, there was a time. Gather round, children, adults. Well, I have a story, shocker, where it was the DNC came to see the show, and lots of energy, so on and so forth. And I just found out that day that my agent, my first agent I've had forever, that she had passed away. She literally just dropped dead. She was very old, very lovely, very sweet. Barbara Andreatis, she was the best. At the time, I was trying to get in contact with her to possibly like leave and move to another agent, and it was all very sad. And I was backstage, and me and Anthony shared a dressing room. He was like, "Yo, bro, just take a shot, man, and just take a shot. That'll just like calm you down," because I was really stressed. And in my brain, I knew it was a terrible idea. But every now and again, the terrible idea wins. So, I took a shot, and I was like, okay, cool, going about the show. So we have the opening, my shot, where I'm banging on the table, and I have my beanie. And I normally take like a bobby pin, and I stick it in my hair, in my beanie. And like I took the shot, and I was still like thinking about stuff, and I was like kind of late, so I was trying to like get the pin in my hat, and it just wasn't going, so I just like shove it in, and I run on stage. So I'm banging on a table. Look at me, I'm banging on a table, doing a thing. They're doing the rap, and I look over, and David's rapping. He looks over at me, and he goes, then he keeps going, and I'm like, what's going on? And I wore a really heavy, that green coat is like rawhide leather. It's heavy. I would sweat all the time. I question life every day. Like, why am I doing this? So I would always be sweating profusely, banging on the table. Then Anthony looks over and gives me like a double take, and I'm like, what's going on? And I wipe my head, and then I see blood on my hand. I'm like, all right, that's weird. And I just keep banging on the table. and Leslie, Odom, he is cool as a cucumber. That's the coolest cat you'll ever meet in your life. And he's coming over, and he's singing, and then he's doing his thing, and he goes. And I'm like, wait, no. And then I do this again, and now my whole hand is covered in blood. So then I keep banging on the table, and I look in the front row, and there's literally like a woman in the front row, like. So in the middle of it, I eventually get up and walk off. I remember I touched Seth or something as he goes on, and I look at him, and I think there's a little blood print on his hand, and I look in the mirror, and I shove the pin in my head. Instead of getting my beanie, I just shoved it in my head, because I was like, oh no, she died, I hate this, bam. Shove it in, go on stage. So I'm just bleeding profusely. And I get back there, and the makeup girl's like, ah! And I was like, what to do? So we're we're wiping it as much as we can. I'm holding it as much as we can, buying as much time before I have to say more things for the show. And eventually she sticks something in there, puts the beanie back on, and I just run out, wipe my hands, and continue doing the show. But that is one of the moments. There are many, but that is my moment where things just
Literally
went
blood,
very
sweat,
well.
and tears.
Wow.
The succession of looks at you like.
Yeah, everyone just getting more and more and more. And Leslie's, because Leslie, I mean, he's cool. And he doesn't. And his face just went, ah!
Oh my gosh. I'm not sure how you top that, but
I have put any embarrassing moment on stage as it pertains to this show, I put it completely out of my mind.
That makes sense.
Except that I was at one point writing a song for Sesame Street, which I do. And it was about trees.
Yeah, give it up for
Thanks.
trees. Give it up for trees.
Please.
That was it. Good night. And in right hand, I had been demoing the song during the day and then going into work. And it got to Right Hand Man, and one of the long and the short of it is in the Sesame Street song, Timber, it was like the chorus that we were working on, and I got to Right Hand Man. And in the moment of incoming, I went, incoming!
Timber!
The thing to know, yeah, the mind is a weird thing, and when you get memory, it's not, when we're doing the show, it's not memory, it's muscle memory, which isn't controllable in the same way. It's like an engine that goes, you just touch it a little bit and it goes. You don't have to pedal, right? That's muscle memory. Things that you have to remember is more of I think, a concerted. There are very smart people in the world to talk about this. I'm not one of them. I will say, though, that if and when something went wrong in our show, if Leslie coughed where he was supposed to say a word in the opening number, the rest of the show, everyone was like, oh, damn.
Everybody knows.
Because
you
the
can
whole
feel it.
show, because it's sung through, even when you're off stage, it's all a part of an internalized rhythm. You always know where you are. You choreograph your drink of water, your hello to your dresser, your joke with, Seth or Ephraim, and the people that you lean on the most on stage and off will have you for lunch if you are responsible for making the slightest mistake. And so
In a very friendly, loving way.
But like really harsh, loving sibling way.
like
You know what I mean?
make you question your life choices, why do I like people kind of way. I just remember
As your family does.
me coming out of that freeze when you and Lynn and Hercules and Hamilton come in, that whole part. When I come out of the freeze, I can't make eye contact with anybody because even Ari DeBose is trying to not laugh in my face. And it goes on for 20 or 30 minutes in the show until the next thing happens. It's terrible. I also tripped a lot going up and down the stairs. Always in front of Seth and
The
Ephraim.
sword. It wasn't fair for you,
Y'all enjoyed the sword because you
did.
would hear the sword bang, bang, bang until I found a way to hold it. It would. It's like dragging a dead body down the stairs. Dunk, 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 dunk. Yeah, it was terrible.
I have two moments that come to mind for me. One is once my lantern for Burn was, so the stage you guys have all seen it now. You know, like in the back, all the way upstage, there's that opening, and that's sort of like the crossover, but there's no crossover behind that. In order to get to the other side of the stage, you either have to go on stage and cross over, on, you know, where everybody can see you, or you have to go all the way underneath. So I enter from stage right, and my lantern is usually placed there. And I was like, where's my lantern? Where's the, I can't burn the letters if I can't find the lantern. And I look, and it's on the other side. And I was like, no, it was like right there. I was like, it's like 10 feet away. I'm like, do I go get it? And so I told the wonderful props guy, I was like, I'm so sorry, but my lantern's on the wrong side. And he was like, and so he runs all the way underneath. By the way, this is like, you're never gonna be president now. And like, so it's like 10 seconds away.
It's time.
And so he ran. And then I see him pop up on the other side, and it's like, do, 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 and he has it, and I'm looking at him, and he just does, what's the Olympic sport where they?
Luge.
Yeah, no.
Curling.
Yeah, curling, like a curling. He takes that thing, and he looks at me, he just goes,
What?
and it slides, I'm like, do, 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 do.
I did not know this.
Yeah, I think it was also lit, like he lit it really quick. He was like, lit the thing, yeah. And so that was like, whoa, that was a close one. And then another one is,
Wait, yeah.
oh yeah.
When did
can't
how do we
leave
Well,
that
you guys
one
are all
yet.
off. I
We
was
can't
alone.
leave that yet.
Nobody was on stage to see. But yeah, that happened. And
That
then
was amazing.
during so Eliza is now pregnant. Hamilton is coming home because George Washington yelled at him and was like, "Go home." And he does. And I had a really quick change into this like pregnancy outfit, and this was, I believe it was downtown, but my zipper had broken. So my sweet dresser was like, oh my gosh, and she couldn't get the zipper to go up, and then it just broke. So my whole, and like we had to wear these like crazy mic packs, and then I also had like this crazy like kind of like tutu bustle thing. Like it was heinous. It looked crazy back there. And so it was all open, and I have to come on, and I say, look around, look around. And so the whole time I'm like, okay, if I turn around, they're gonna see, so I'm just gonna do the whole thing facing forward. So Lynn would sit on the bench and I'd be like, I don't pretend to know the challenges you're facing. And like I did the whole thing, like you couldn't, like just so I wouldn't turn around. And nobody knew. Nobody knew. They were probably like, why is she doing that weird walk, that weird like backwards walk? But you know, she's pregnant. Pregnant
You
people
walk backwards when you're
backwards.
pregnant.
I don't know.
Well played. Very well played.
Crushed it.
Oh. So as we start to kind of wrap up, thank you for taking us backstage, right, with you. Right? That was amazing. The curling story. How do you ever forget that? And shout out to the props guy, right?
I know, truly, the best.
Right.
The best.
But let's talk a little bit now, just back to the history and how did being a part of this? I mean, you were both telling history and making history, right? As you were doing Hamilton. But how did being in Hamilton change your relationship to history? Were you a history lover before? Did it deepen your interest? Did it open up new stories? I mean, did it make you more of a history lover, less of a history lover?
I truly felt like the responsibility of being a citizen really dawned on me for the first time, for a lot of reasons. Like I had been like a handful of years out of school at that point. Obama was in office. I felt the responsibility of being not only an artist in the world, but an artist as a citizen, and what that meant. And just personally, I felt very much like we have an obligation together to see this through. And I just want to say, how many of y'all are registered to vote? Okay. I'd love to hear that, because truly I understood for the first time that democracy is a verb. It's something that you do. It's not a thing that exists outside of yourself. It's something that only exists if we participate in it. So, yeah. So feeling that, instead of feeling like a small part of something that's so big it's beyond me, I felt like I am a part of something huge. And I have a huge responsibility here, and I took that very seriously, and I accepted it with like joy, and I still feel that joy. And anyway, I just want to just say to everyone out there, check your registration, get everyone that you know to go out and vote. It's so important to our democracy, and yeah, I'll leave that with you there.
Brilliant.
I agree to yes and that. It kind of made me I became more of an activist in my personal life, especially during COVID and during George Floyd, seeing how many people would quote or refer back to Hamilton and the need to speak up and speak out and come together, knowing that there are so many people who are now aware of us and what we say and how we move. It kind of gave me a different level of citizenshipness. That's not what you said. You said it better, but y'all get it. To what am I doing, especially with this platform, with my social media page? Is it just hey, look at me, or da-da-da-da-da, I'm getting coffee, or whatever the hell else people be doing? It's what am I saying? How am I galvanizing people if they're looking to me? Because of the political climate, people's eyes went to Hamilton. It's am I talking about registering to vote, your local elections, who your DA is, who your the sheriff is, all of these things that we may not be aware of. What can I now do with this platform given to me by this show? What am I saying? How am I speaking and honoring the energy of the birth of this country right now, today? How can I do that and draw that line for everyone who's watching it who may not have drawn that line themselves, because our voices have different weights now because of how we came to fame and what we're associated with. It kind of led me to be more aware of what I'm doing and lean more towards being an activist and saying, what am I saying, how am I saying it, why am I saying it, and what am I saying it for? Which I think is very much so how Hamilton, Madison, how they were able to do what they were doing. Why am I a spy? What am I a spy for? What is this going to lead to? And how does this affect me, my children, and this country? So, yeah.
Chris.
Hamilton, because of the nature of the story, is inherently political, right? It's a political tale. But the movement of it exists because of the people that, again, as I said earlier, had an experience and felt compelled to tell someone about it. As folks who were inside it, we were both aware of what was happening and also aware that things were happening to us as artists, as people who were in a position to, through the show, contribute to the culture in a way that hadn't really been made affordable to us before. So not to be a gatekeeper, I'm by no means a gatekeeper. I'm just very sensitive about how we regard our culture. All of it, all of the influences, all of the definitions and the redefinitions and the acceptance and the rejection of certain ideas. And I found myself growing very leery of a faction, a movement of people out there that are only here to criticize our culture, but not to add to it. From an artistic standpoint, it's very easy to sit and read copy that a news producer wrote, criticizing a particular thing that they have no awareness of whatsoever. And yet the industry of not critique, but of criticism is a different thing. And so I find myself being very vigilant as an artist. I want to write the thing or create the thing or be a part of the thing that creates the most amount of discussion for the most amount of people, right? And always looking for a reason to both defend it, but also allow the people to help make it better by talking about the things that appeal to them or that they can relate to. You know, there's so many different touch points about Hamilton that you can marvel at. They spent probably the least amount of advertising money of any Broadway show in the last 30 years because the people drove it through social media, through word of mouth, through coming back, because they saw themselves somewhere inside that story. It appealed to them, and that's such a powerful thing. And it isn't about the number of tickets that got sold, although it is. It's not about the number. No, but I mean, if the show doesn't stay open, then it was a great thing that happened it was a comet. And this is different, and it's special in spite of it and because of it as well. You know, it's a lot of things to a lot of people, but I find myself, it has shaped me in that I'm hyper aware of wanting to make things that are provocative and comforting at the same time. Yes. Right? And I think that, as crazy as it seems, because we all love the show for our own reasons, but there's plenty of people that have made a lot of money just critiquing the idea of something that could be this appealing to this many people for this long. Right. And I think that we just need more of it. We need more of that. I think something that we were always really fond of saying to one another at the end of before every show is that if we do our job right, no one will leave the way they came in. We'll all leave better than the way we came in. And that's, I think that's what happened.
There it is. There it is. There it is. I think, right, Hamilton is one of those things that reminds us that we're really able to do great things, right? We're capable of great things as a country and as an ensemble. Thank you all for being such brilliant, I like the way you said it, artists and citizens. Yeah. Thank you to this tremendous audience.
Thank you guys.
Super fans.
Yeah, you guys are great.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you.